Right, we come to the next urgent question. Dr Luke Evans, Shadow Minister.
To ask the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care if he'll make a statement on the impacts of changes to employer national insurance contributions on primary care providers, hospices and care homes.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I am grateful to the honourable member for Hinckley and Bosworth for asking this important question. It gives me the opportunity to say to GPs, dentists, hospices and every part of the health and care system that will be affected by changes to employers' national insurance contributions that this government understands the pressures they face and takes their representation seriously. The Chancellor took into account the impact of changes to national insurance when she allocated an extra £26 billion to the Department of Health and Social Care. There are well-established processes for agreeing funding allocations across the system. We are going through those processes now with this issue in mind. This government inherited a £22 billion black hole in the public finances, broken public services and a stagnant economy. Upon taking office, we were told that the deficit the previous government recklessly ran up in my department alone would mean delivering 20,000 fewer appointments a week instead of the 40,000 more we promised. The Chancellor and my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, were not prepared to see further declining our NHS. That's why we put an extra £1.8 billion of funding to stop the NHS going into reverse this year. And at the budget, we built on this, delivering the significant investment the NHS needs to get back on its feet, backing staff, investment in modern technology, new scanners, new surgical hubs, and rebuilding our crumbling primary and secondary care estate. Alongside this, we delivered real terms increase in core local government spending power of around 3.2%, which will help to address the range of pressures facing the adult social care sector, including £600 million in new grant funding for social care. We are now, Mr Speaker, working through exactly how that money will be allocated as per normal processes, and as the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care set out yesterday, we will ensure that every pound is invested wisely to deliver the government's priorities and provide value to taxpayers. The Department will set out further details on allocation of funding in due course, including through NHS planning guidance and the usual consultations, including on the general practice contract. As part of these processes, we will consider the impact of changes announced to employer national insurance contributions in a fair and open way over the next 5 months before the changes come into force in April 2025.
Dr Luke Evans.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I draw the House to my declaration of interest. Many in the health sector would have been pleased to hear the announcement of the extra funding going to the NHS, only for the joy to be struck down by the realisation of a broken manifesto promise not to raise national insurance contributions. This was only compounded further on the discovery that a raft of frontline care providers, care homes, hospices, care charities, pharmacies, GPs, to name but a few, found themselves not exempt from the NI rises, leaving them with crippling staff bills and the threat of closure and redundancies. The hospice sector expects the cost to be £30 million, closure and redundancies. For GPs, the initial assessment could be £260 million, closure, redundancies and the cost of 2.2 million appointments. And from the care sector, the changes alone will cost £2.4 billion, dwarfing the £600 million announced by social care support. So does she accept that council tax will inevitably have to rise to support the increase in NICs? And now, for the first time, the National Pharmacies Association has announced collective action. The chair of the National Pharmacies Union has said the sense of anger amongst pharmacy owners has been intensified exponentially by the budget, with its hike in national insurance employers' contribution and unfunded national living wage increase, which has tipped even more pharmacies to the brinks. So I asked the Minister to clarify, who is exempt from NI? Will they admit they got it wrong and make a change? The Prime Minister, Health Secretary and Chancellor have all said that allocations will be made in the usual way. So will the Minister clarify what is the usual way? Will mitigations be put in black and white to this House and the public so they can see? And is this part of the £20 billion or new funding? But more importantly, will the Minister lay out a concrete timetable for hospices, care homes, GPs, pharmacies and all other allied health professionals who are making decisions now? Because this seems another example of a big headline by the Labour Party, but no detail.
Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, really, I mean, I'm really quite dumbfounded by the response from the Honourable Member, who I respect for his own professional practice, and that he knows the state of the NHS when he was in opposition and what we inherited, as reported through Lord Darcy's report. He talks about joy. There was no joy when we inherited the mess that they left back in July. He talked about people being tipped to the brink. They absolutely were, and that's what Lord Darcy's made absolutely clear. As I've said, we will go through the allocation of the additional funding in the normal process, which will be faster than it was under his government, because we are committed to giving the sector much more certainty. And the normal process, actually, he should really know, for his time in opposition, is to go through the mandate and the planning guidance and talk to the sector about the allocations that will be due for in next April, as I said in my opening statement.
George Fenton-Glynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my honourable friend agree with me that we welcome the members opposite's new interest in social care? And does she further agree with me that perhaps the problems that social care face owe more to the failure of the members opposite to do anything with Andrew Dilnot's report given to them in 2011 and not anything that's happening with national insurance now?
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend makes an excellent point. I remember when I joined this House in 2015 that the first action of the new Conservative, fully Conservative non-coalition government was to take the legs from underneath that social care commitment by postponing the Care Act. They said cynically at the time they were going to bring it forward back at 2020, which they thought might be the next general election. We all saw how that went.
Alison Bennett, the Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The increase in employer national insurance contributions will erode the very investment in the NHS that the budget sought to prioritise. Katie, a GP from Lindfield in mid-Sussex, wrote to me saying that the NIC's increases serve to directly undermine access and patient care. The government have promised to recruit more GPs, but hiking national insurance puts that pledge in jeopardy. Surgeries are set to see eye-watering increases in their staff costs, the equivalent to 26,786 appointments in West Sussex alone. GPs will have no choice but to cut services and staff numbers, and patients will pay the price. Does the Minister agree with me that stronger primary care, with faster appointments and fewer people having to go to hospital, is better for the NHS and for patients? And if so, will she protect services and press the Chancellor to end this GP penalty?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her point, and I think she makes an excellent point about how important GPs and primary care are to the wider sector. That's why straight away in the summer, when we came into office, we freed up the system to employ those extra 1,000 GPs through the R's process that the last government refused to do, because we recognised that they needed that extra capacity. We will be talking with the general practice as part of the contract reforms over the next few months in the normal process about the allocations for next year.
Rachael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the ambition this government has, stemming from Lord Darcy's report, is to be realised, then significant investment is required in not only primary care but also in third sector organisations. However, right now they are really concerned about the increased cost pressures which are being placed on those services. So will she ensure that there is sufficiency within the trickle-down approach that the department will have to now apply to hold up the current level of service, but also to see that transition which is urgently needed across health services?
I thank my honourable friend for her question and respect her expertise in this area, and she's absolutely right. The pressures are very real. We understand those pressures. That's why we have committed to supporting the NHS and social care system with that additional funding that my right honourable friend was able to secure as part of the budget settlement. We are also working very closely with the NHS in a new relationship with them to understand the need that they have to support and understand what's going on in local systems, and that's a very dynamic conversation that we want to understand what's happening in local systems and continue to invest in them.
Father of the House, Sir Edward Leigh.
We all know that a lot of the debate around assisted dying is around the lack of places in hospices which help people in their passing in the best way possible. A lot of the debate around NHS is around the lack of care home spaces. So leaving aside the name-calling between parties, may I beg the Minister to reconsider and to exempt hospices and care homes from this national insurance increase?
Minister.
I understand the point that the honourable gentleman is making. As I said, we will pursue the conversations with all affected providers in the normal way.
Dr. Peter Prince.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister agree with me that the support that we will put in place for general practice, and in particular the community health hubs, which were announced recently, will be crucial to the improvement in the health service which we so urgently need to see?
Minister.
Well, again, I thank my honourable friend and going to respect his expertise and service to the National Health Service, and he will understand the need to make that shift into neighbourhood health services, but also, as we have said, to be very clear that we are making sure that the NHS spends all of its allocation in the most effective way to enable that shift as part of our 10-year plan.
Richard.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Trustee of Hamelin, a not-for-profit provider of care and support across Essex, has contacted me very concerned about the £92,650 rise they're going to have to pay in national insurance costs because of what the government is bringing in. He said to me that this will affect what they can do to support our communities and subsequently put more pressure on the NHS and local authorities, and also that the impact on disabled people and older adults who rely on their regular, consistent and high-quality care will be profound. I don't believe that the government's intention was to absolutely hammer the disabled or all those older people who need care. So will the Minister prove me right and actually look at this policy again?
Minister.
Well, again, and the honourable member in a different place was part of the last government. I appreciate he's talking to new constituents, but you know the inheritance that we had, the 22 billion black hole, the report from Lord Darcy, I'm afraid indicates the fragility of the system that we have inherited. And of course, we are making sure that vulnerable groups are supported through both the allocation of health and social care and with my colleagues in the Department of Work and Pensions.
Andrew Lewin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When this party came into government in July, every single element of our health service was in crisis. Since then, we have announced record investment in our National Health Service, and I am yet to hear whether the party opposite supports that record investment. So would my friend the Minister agree with me that this is a government that is listening to health professionals, taking the tough decisions, and not simply playing politics?
Well, he makes an excellent point. We still haven't heard from the party opposite. Not only do they agree with the extra investment that has gone into the sector, but whether they agree with Lord Darcy's report on the diagnosis of the legacy they left and why they did that, and the serious issues that we now have to address.
Manera Wilson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Shooting Star Children's Hospice in Hampton serves children with life-limiting conditions and supports their families, not just across my constituency, but right across South West London and Surrey. They're facing a bill of £200,000 with the national insurance hike, on top of all the inflationary costs they've had to absorb, and they're also waiting for confirmation on whether the Children's Hospice grant, which they've had this year of £1.8 million, will continue beyond April 2025. Will the Minister commit to making hospices exempt from the NI rise, not just nursing staff, but all staff? And when will she be able to give Shooting Star and other children's hospices confirmation on whether the Children's Hospice grant will continue? They need to plan now.
Minister.
Well, I commend the Honourable Lady for raising the work of her, as our members will do, hospices and the great work that they do. And we absolutely understand the pressures and the precarious situation that many of them have been left in after the last 14 years of the last government. We are absolutely willing and keen to talk to all sectors, hospices and others. We are going through the process of the allocations, and we will be able to get back to them as soon as possible.
Mark Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hundreds of my constituents in Leeds South West and Morley are stuck on record-long waiting lists, thanks in total to the party opposite. It's absolutely essential that we get these waiting lists down because it has profound effects on our economy and on their health. Can the Minister confirm that the measures we set out in the budget will provide the additional appointments needed to get these waiting lists down?
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend makes an excellent point, and as I said in my response to the member opposite, we face a situation where we were told that we would be reducing appointments by 20,000 a week, and we have taken serious steps, and my right honourable friend fought very hard for that allocation in order to have those 40,000 extra appointments. We promised in our manifesto that was overwhelmingly endorsed by the British public that we would bring change to the system, that we would absolutely tackle those waiting lists, and that's what we are determined to do.
Increased taxes on hospices, care homes, GPs and pharmacies. Is this a deliberate decision by the Labour government or just a cock-up?
No, I would say.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his friend. We understand the precarious situation that hospices are in, and we are absolutely committed to talking with them and other affected providers about the impact of the situation they are in, the precarious situation they found themselves in before we took to power, and we will be going through that normal process of allocations in the next few months.
Alex Bellinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many constituents of mine in Helzowen continue to wait on record-long waiting lists. Does the Minister agree with me that before the opposition throw stones, that we should remind the House that their spending plans would have cut £15 billion from the NHS, and that would have damaged an already broken NHS and completely shattered it?
I thank my honourable friend for his question, and I mean it is a case, and I've been in their situation as well, but the honourable members opposite who have held on to their seats, they also know that the public, staff, patients know exactly the state they left the NHS in, and that is why they had such a disastrous election result. We are determined to change the NHS, we are determined to make it fit for the 21st century, and part of what we've done in this budget, with that extra allocation and our conversations with the health and social care system and our 10-year plan, will do just that.
Sherry Slogan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while Scotland's public sector is facing a £500 million bill for the Chancellor's reckless national insurance hike, Scotland's charities, including hospices, face a £75 million price tag under these changes. Mr. Speaker, the budget simply cannot be balanced on the back of Scotland's charities and hospices. This is a disgraceful decision for which the Labour government is rightly being hounded. There's still time for the UK government to do the right thing and cover these costs. I agree with the honourable member, the Father of the House. Can the Minister tell us if they will?
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable member for his question, and you know the SNP have been in charge in Scotland for now, I forget exactly how long, but somehow over 20 years. It seems like a very long time. Again, the Scottish people gave an excellent result at the general election. I'm delighted to have so many Scottish colleagues with me here now. They have opportunity to make decisions in Scotland around health and social care as well, and I suggest that they do a better job.
Calder.
Mr. Speaker, it's disappointing, to put it mildly, that the opposition spokesperson were unable to mention the record funding committed in the budget. It's also disappointing. It's also.
Order. Can I just say to the Shadow Minister, he's been granted a UQ. He asks the questions, he doesn't answer them from the front bench.
It's also disappointing that they ignore the fact that they completely disregarded and ignored social care when they were in office. Does my honourable friend the Minister agree?
No responsibility for the government.
Well, I do. And as I said, I remember very clearly when I became a new Member of Parliament in 2015, the absolute shock with which they came out immediately after that election and announced that they were not going to make the commitment they already had to implement the Care Act at that time, and we are still playing catch-up on that issue.
John Lamont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Doctors from Duns, Galashiels, Selkirk, Kelso and across the Scottish borders have contacted me about the impact that this national insurance hike is going to have on their practices. They tell me that the decision will be a huge retrograde step for primary care, will have a huge financial impact on their practice and will undermine access for primary inpatient care. So why has the Labour government made this choice to hammer local doctors?
Thank the honourable gentleman for his question. As I said, we have made a commitment to general practice and primary care by releasing the system to have those extra GPs in the system, because we absolutely recognise the situation that GPs are in. On myself, I worked with GP practices in my previous career. We need them to be the foundation of our neighbourhood services. That is why we will talk in the normal normal process about the allocations over the next few months as part of the contract.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If we're going to reform the NHS, we need to move resources over time into primary care. The reality is that GPs see at first instance 90% of patients, but have only got 8% of the NHS funding. So I say to my honourable friend, will she ensure that in the settlement that's done with the NHS providers, that particular attention is given to supporting GPs in this? But in looking at the social care sector, can we help the hospices and social care providers, who are charities, small organisations in particular, but perhaps without subsidising some of the hedge funds that are now investing heavily in social care? We don't want to add to their profits, do we, while supporting the small charities involved?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question, and of course he has led such fantastic work in previous parliaments around health and social care systems, something he understands very well. I think he makes an excellent point about making sure that additional funding goes to absolutely where we want it to go, which is to support people, particularly in social care. In our constituencies, we all have seen the situation over the last decade or so. We want to improve that. It's absolutely critical to both the urgent and emergency care system, but also for the dignity of people who need that service. And we will continue to talk to them and talk to local systems about the impact of any changes.
Mr. Speaker, I hear what the Minister says when she says that the Government wanted to stop the NHS going into reverse, but I have to tell her that is exactly what risks happening to GP practices in my constituency. I met with one on Friday who told me as a consequence of having to find the extra national insurance contributions, they won't now be able to make a support post permanent, which is on a temporary contract, and they won't proceed with the recruitment of the extra GP that they were wanting to take on. There is a contradiction at the heart of the rules here. They are treated as private contractors, but if they were private contractors, they would be eligible for employment allowance. Because their work is entirely in the public sector, they can't get that. Surely something's got to give.
Well, the honourable gentleman tempts me to go back to my previous career and working with general practice and their employment and contractual status, but I'm not going to do that now because the Speaker would quite rightly curtail me. They do have a complicated contractual status that has been long in the process. We absolutely understand the precariousness of primary care. They are crucial to our plans for developing their health service, and we will be discussing with them in the normal process about the allocations for the following year.
Jim Dixon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The budget last month finally gave my constituents in Dartford hope that there will be an NHS that works for them. Can my honourable friend reassure me that this government will avoid the sticking plaster piecemeal approach of the last government and bring forward a long-term plan to fix the NHS for the future?
I thank my honourable friend for his question, and of course he's absolutely right. Getting away from those short fixes, sticking plasters, is exactly what we are attempting to do. That's why we put that extra security in over the summer with the extra GPs. That's why we were able to secure the extra budget commitment, extra funding in the budget commitment, and that's also why we've launched our 10-year plan. If I may, Mr. Speaker, I encourage all honourable members and their constituents to consult, give their views into that exercise at change.nhs.uk.
Sir Roger Gale.
Mr. Speaker, Dr. Alexandra Fox of the Ash Surgery in my constituency is one of a number of GPs who pointed out to me the deleterious effects of an ill-thought-through budget. Add to that charities like Shooting Star Children's Hospice and the Demelza House Children's Hospice, who are facing problems now. They can't wait for discussions through the normal channels while this cock-up is put right. When is something going to be done about it, please?
Minister. Well, the honourable member says that it's an ill-thought-through budget. I don't know whether he agrees or disagrees with the extra funding that this government has secured to give to the NHS after the disaster of the last 14 years.
Joanna Baxter. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This morning we've learned that the Scottish Government have just wasted £28 million of taxpayers' money on a flawed, ill-conceived National Care Service bill, which didn't command the support of almost any stakeholder that they would need in order to pass it. Can my honourable friend agree with me that the additional funding that has been committed to the NHS through our Labour budget is used to come up with a proper plan for social care across the UK and doesn't follow the same flawed approach that's happening in Scotland?
Minister. Well, I mean, I am so pleased to see my honourable friend in her place. As I said to the honourable member opposite, the SNP have been in charge of Scotland for a very long time. We have certainly missed a Scottish Labour voice in this place. She makes an excellent point and shines some sunlight in this place on the actions that they have been taken up at Holyrood.
John Glenn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Julia's House Hospice does amazing work across Wiltshire and Dorset, but their Chief Executive, Martin Edwards, came to Parliament on Tuesday to tell me that the additional national insurance contributions will cost the hospice £250,000 a year. Now, alongside Naomi's House, which does similar good work, this is a significant concern. Now, I know the people of Wiltshire and Dorset will do as much as they can to raise additional funds, but could the Minister reflect on that gap, that unexpected gap, and offer some reassurance this morning?
Minister. Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his comments, and I agree with him. His hospice and the hospices of many of our constituents do great work, and we are aware of the precarious situation that they have been in for a number of years, and we want to make sure that they are fully part of end-of-life care. And he will know from his time in the Treasury that there are complicated processes, both in the Treasury and in the Department of Health. When I talk about the normal processes for allocating money, I think he understands that well. We are mindful of their concerns. We will continue to talk with them.
Anna Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. During the party opposite's time in government, the number of general practices fell between 2013 and 2023 from 8,044 to 6,419. So does my honourable friend agree with me that it's a bit rich for the party opposite to be now pretending they care so much about general practice, given that 1,600 practices closed on their watch?
Well, I mean, I'm extremely grateful to my honourable friend, and she brings a great deal of expertise to this House as well from her work on social care, so she absolutely knows and understands the precarious nature. We can't stress that enough. I don't know if the party opposite have actually read Lord Darcy's report, but that with the appendices gives them, Mr. Speaker, a really clear idea, a diagnosis of the state in which the NHS and social care system was left. It is going to take a long time to rebuild it. The sustainability of general practice and primary care is particularly problematic. That's why we make those actions in the summer. That's why we will continue to support them and build up a neighbourhood health service.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Clearly the Minister will understand that GPs are private contractors to the health service, similarly pharmacists, hospices and many other wonderful charities. The government has decided to make sure that the public sector is protected against the national insurance increase, and all that she has to do, or her Secretary of State has to do, is to agree that all the suppliers to the National Health Service in this vein are also protected. And that would safeguard the position, because otherwise what we're going to see is care homes closing down, pharmacies closing down, hospices not being able to provide the service. And in my constituency, we have a wonderful St Luke's Hospice that does brilliant work. I helped found it back in the 1980s. And the reality is they've told me they're going to have to reduce services drastically as a result of this. They've also had to cope with the fact that whenever the nurses and other medical practitioners get a pay rise, they are not given the money to give that pay rise, and that needs to be protected as well.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his comments, and again he's supporting his local hospice, as many of us are. But he's an experienced parliamentarian. He knows that this is not simple. He knows that it's a very complicated provider landscape, and as we heard from my honourable friend earlier, many of these social care providers are owned by large equity companies as well. We want to make sure that any additional funding that's come from this budget goes exactly to where it needs to be, which is supporting patients, our constituents, where they live, where they need that care. That's why over the next few months we are continuing to talk to those providers in the usual way about the allocation of these funds.
Ellie Chand.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Since the budget, I've been contacted by GPs, care providers and charities in my constituency, all expressing concern about the impact of the rise in employer NICs on their ability to serve the most vulnerable in our community. Can I ask the Minister, please, will she reconsider, particularly to find a way to exempt the charitable sector in the same way that the public sector has been exempted? I've written to the Ministers, I've tabled EDMs on this motion, on this issue. Will she take this opportunity in the House to assure the charitable sector that they will not be impacted by this measure?
Minister.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. She tempts me to make specific commitments, which I think she understands that I'm not prepared to do. She's right that people are expressing concerns about some of those decisions. That's because they're in such a precarious situation because of what we inherited over the last 14 years. It is going to take, and the Prime Minister and everybody speaking from the government has been very clear of this through the election and afterwards, it is going to take a long time. That's why we've got a 10-year plan to fix the foundations, to build up the sector to be more resilient, to sustain it for the future. We want to build those, fix those foundations. We will be talking closely with everyone affected over the coming months, but this is going to take a long time. They are precarious because of the mess that we inherited.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Earlier this week, I received a letter from the Lincolnshire and Nottinghamshire Air Ambulance, a charitable healthcare provider. The national insurance change is going to add £70,000 a year to their costs. If they are forced to close, lives will be lost. Can I urge the Minister, who I know would want to protect this service, to do all she can to ensure that this air ambulance and others across the country are not hit by this tax?
Minister. I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and what I can assure him of is that this government, because of its actions already taken since we were elected, by securing that extra investment in the health and social care system, is absolutely committed to building a thriving health and social care system up until and through the rest of the 21st century.
Leigh Dillon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A rural pharmacist, one of the few remaining in my constituency, derives 90% of its turnover from providing NHS services. So will the Minister consider giving pharmacists with such a large proportion of their work an exemption from the NICs rises? And also, what assessment has the government made of the impact of programmes like Pharmacy First continuing to be delivered if pharmacists have to shut their doors?
Well, the honourable gentleman makes an excellent point about pharmacies. They are so important to both in constituencies like mine, which are urban, but also in rural areas, and we absolutely understand that. And one of the other things I remember from my starting in 2015 was the changes that the last government made to the pharmacy contract and the precarious situation that they have been in. We will continue to talk to them as part of the normal process, but we do understand how important they are to our building a neighbourhood service and the future of the NHS.
Dame Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Acorns Children's Hospice, St Richard's Hospice, GPs, care homes, pharmacies across West Worcestershire have all been in touch with concerns about this extra cost burden that her government has imposed upon them. Can she explain how it fits in with her strategic plans to slap extra cost on the community sector while rebating the NHS trust sector?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. I'm sure that all those hospices which do a great work were also in touch with her when she was part of the last government, and she will know from her time on the Treasury Select Committee that the budget process goes through, and then we go through the planning guidance and have conversations with all core contracted sectors, and that is part of the normal process. We are absolutely committed to building back the foundations of the NHS and social care system, making it fit for the 21st century, making a 10-year plan which we want everyone to contribute to, and community neighbourhood partnerships, neighbourhood systems are fundamentally part of that.
Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Like other GPs, pharmacies and indeed social care homes have contacted me across Ceredigion and Preseli to express their concerns about the impact of the policy changes with regards to employees' national insurance contributions. It is essential that they are supported with the cost that comes from this policy. Now, the Minister has suggested that there might be additional support for some of them through the usual means or the usual systems. Can I just ask her to clarify whether that will be funding being found from the Department's budget, or whether there will be additional new money from the Treasury? Because that would have certain ramifications to the Welsh Government with regards to whether or not they'll get additional Barnett formula funding or not?
Minister.
Thank you, the honourable gentleman, for his questions, and I understand the concerns of the providers that have come to him, and he is right to raise them in this place. As he knows, the health and social care is devolved into the Welsh Government. There has been much benefit from the Barnett consequentials already of the budget, and we will continue to talk with the devolved regions in a much more cooperative way, may I say, than the last government did, to make sure that we have a good system across the entire United Kingdom.
Robbie Moore.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In a tweet to the Health Secretary, Caroline Raymond, who is the clinical lead for the Wharfdale and Silsden Community Partnership, said, and I quote, "You came to our practice in June and you told us you wanted to support the family doctor. Costs for the national minimum wage and national insurance will cost us approximately £50,000. We are a small practice of 7,000 patients. How is this helping us?" Can the Minister answer Caroline's question?
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. I'm not abreast of all of the Health Secretary's tweets and response to them, but she makes a point that has been made by very many people here today and has been made by all of those providers. As I said in my opening statement, we understand the precarious situation that all of these providers have been put in because of the failures of the last 14 years and the government have inherited and the £22 billion black hole. As was said by my honourable friend from Shipley, general practice has been put into a precarious situation over the last 14 years. Thousands of practices going bust, giving back their contracts. That's a situation we promise the British public we will change, and we will do that.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In Suffolk, the national insurance increase creates £11 million of additional pressures for adult social care alone. And I don't think the Minister understands that she's not just engaged in some party political knockabout with our benches. There are people, there are GPs, hospices, care homes, charities, pharmacies who are watching this and they are looking to her for answers. They know that this problem was caused by their tax rise, which is being implemented without a plan for them. So can she tell them when the solution is going to be brought forward by the government? When are they going to get reassurance about their futures?
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his claims, and he may or may not think that this is political knockabout. I have been very clear in my opening statement that we understand the pressures that the sector is under. We understand the mess that we inherited. We are fixing that. We are working with social care, with GPs, providers and hospices that are affected by any changes in the budget. We will continue to talk to them in the usual way. We are committed to doing this faster than the last government did. The last government planning guidance and commitment to the NHS was always running late. They were always playing catch-up. We are committed to making sure they are much more sustainable to do the important job we're asking them to do.
And Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I suppose when they know that I come, I'm the last person to know this one's over, but they're almost over. Can I say to the Minister, ask this question, will the Minister confirm whether there has been considerations given to the fact that national insurance contributions will not affect the NHS as a whole, as the block grant for us in Northern Ireland will cover that? However, on behalf of my Strangford constituency GP practices, they will suffer. And unlike high street business or manufacturing, a GP cannot increase prices to cover the impending rise, leaving practices with no other option than to reduce hours to stay solvent. Would the Minister agree that this is the last thing we need in already overwrought GP practices? So will the Minister commit to take this issue back to Treasury for reconsideration for healthcare business such as GPs, dentistry and pharmacies?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. As he knows, health and social care is a devolved issue. We will continue to work closely with all the devolved areas because we think that's important, unlike the last Labour government, the last Conservative government slipped there and almost got through. Look, we absolutely understand the precarious nature of general practice, and I particularly understand the really serious issues around health and social care in Northern Ireland, and I know the honourable gentleman knows that and also makes a good case for them. We want to make sure that they support people in Northern Ireland with the good primary and community care that they also deserve.
That concludes the urgent question. I'll let the front benches quickly shuffle over.